Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Divyasani, your PGT history guide, and I am so pumped you're here. Look, if you're a Class 10 student staring down the barrel of that very first history chapter, The Rise of Nationalism in Europe, and you're kind of freaking out about how you're ever going to memorize it all, just take a breath. You're in exactly the right place. Today, we're going to absolutely conquer the crucial first 2 pages of Chapter 1. We're talking decoding those tricky images, unpacking the heavy-duty vocabulary, and zeroing in on literally exactly what the CBSE board examiners are looking for. All right, let's get into it. So here's our game plan for today. We'll start with Soryo's utopian vision, move into decoding that famous painting, hit the key exam vocabulary, break down modern versus nation states, and finally tackle Ernst Renan's big question: what is a nation? Let's go. All right, Section 1, Soryo's utopian vision. Now, you guys know board examiners absolutely love testing picture-based source material, right? So we really need to pay attention here. What you're looking at is a print from way back in 1848 by a French artist named Frédéric Soryo. This is actually the first of a 4-part series he made, and he gave it this grand title, The Dream of Worldwide Democratic and Social Republics. Remember, in 1848, Europe was pretty much totally controlled by kings and giant empires. But Soryo, he dared to dream up a completely different world. A world actually made up of democratic and social republics. He literally painted his wildest dream of what the future could, and honestly should, look like. Okay, moving on to Section 2, decoding the painting. Let's put on our detective hats for a second and zoom in. Check out how this massive, never-ending train of people is organized. We've got men and women of every age, every social class, marching from Europe and America. And notice how they're grouped into distinct nations? You can actually identify them by their specific flags and traditional costumes. But here's the kicker. Leading this massive procession, already way past the statue, are the United States and Switzerland. Why them? Well, write this down for your exams. By 1848, the US and Switzerland were already established nation-states. They're basically leading the charge for the rest of Europe to follow. Now, as these nations march past, they're paying respect to the Statue of Liberty. This is such a cool detail because artists around the time of the French Revolution loved to personify liberty as a female figure. And you absolutely have to know the 2 symbols she's holding for those tricky identification questions. In one hand, she's holding high the torch of enlightenment. That's all about knowledge, waking up from dark, oppressive times. And in the other hand, she's got the Charter of the Rights of Man. That represents law, justice, and the basic fundamental rights of every citizen. All right, now look down at the very bottom, right in the foreground of the image. You see that pile of rubble? Those are the shattered, broken remains of absolutist institutions. We're talking smashed crowns, broken scepters, ruined castles. Soryo is visually declaring the destruction of these oppressive monarchical regimes to make room for his new republics. So if your exam asks what that foreground rubble represents, you tell them it's the absolute end of unchecked royal power. Boom, 1 mark. Which brings us right to Section 3, key exam vocabulary. You'll want to treat these next terms like mental flashcards to guarantee those easy 1-mark questions. Our first one is absolutist. Now, on a basic level, this just means a government with literally 0 restraints on its power. But for your history board exam, you've got to nail the historical context. It refers to a monarchical government that was, and please memorize these 3 magic words, centralized, militarized, and repressive. The king held all the power, used the military to enforce it, and completely crushed anyone who disagreed. That right there is exactly what lies shattered on the ground in Soryo's painting. Our second flashcard is utopian. A utopia is a vision of a society so incredibly perfect and ideal that it's, well, highly unlikely to ever actually exist. So why do we call Soryo's painting utopian? Because think about it. In 1848, Europe was a mess of violent revolutions and deeply stubborn empires. So painting this gorgeous picture of perfectly peaceful, democratic nations marching together in total harmony, yeah, that was incredibly idealistic. A beautiful dream for sure, but definitely a utopian one. All right, Section 4, modern versus nation state. So stepping out of Soryo's dreamland and back into historical reality, let's contrast 2 huge concepts that basically frame this whole chapter. First up, the modern state. This idea had been brewing in Europe for a while. It basically means you have a centralized power exercising sovereign control over a clearly defined territory, like a single king ruling over a big, diverse empire. But the ultimate goal for the nationalist in the 19th century was the nation-state. This is totally different. In a nation-state, the majority of the citizens themselves, not just the rulers, actually develop a deep sense of common identity. They share a history, a descent. It's that powerful feeling of, hey, we all belong together as one people. And that brings us to a massive historical truth. This sense of commonness, this shared national identity, it didn't just exist from the dawn of time. The French, the Germans, the Italians, they didn't just wake up one Tuesday feeling this magical, unified national spirit. No, as your textbook makes very clear, it was forged. It was hammered out through intense struggles, the brilliant strategies of leaders, and the everyday sacrifices of common people over decades. And finally, Section 5, Renan, what is a nation? This leads us to a fascinating lecture given at the Sorbonne in 1882 by a French philosopher named Ernst Renan. Guys, examiners absolutely love this guy for 3 or 5 mark long answer questions, so heads up. Interestingly, Renan completely flips the standard idea of a nation on its head. Back then, most people argued a nation was just a group of people who shared a language, or a religion, or maybe a territory. Renan says, nope, that's not it at all. He argues that a nation is something deeply historical and emotional. His famous quote, "A nation is the culmination of a long past of endeavors, sacrifice, and devotion." He's saying it's built on a heroic past, on the great people who came before, and on shared glory. That is the true social capital of a nation. So, here is the golden ticket for your board exams. If they ask for Renan's essential conditions for being a nation, these are the exact 4 bullet points you need to drop. Number 1, having common glories in the past. Number 2, having a common will in the present. 3, having performed great deeds together. And 4, the wish to perform still more of them in the future. It's basically a shared historical resume combined with a shared goal for tomorrow. Renan also throws out 2 kind of fancy phrases that we need to unpack really quick. He calls a nation a large-scale solidarity, which just means a massive unified group of people standing shoulder to shoulder. And then he says its existence is a daily plebiscite. Now, a plebiscite is a direct vote where everyone in a region gets to accept or reject a proposal. By calling a nation a daily plebiscite, Renan is saying that a true nation survives only because its people wake up every single day and actively choose to stay united. The inhabitants always have the right to be consulted. You literally cannot just force people to be part of a nation. Let's wrap up with Renan's final big point. Why do nations even matter in the first place? Well, he concludes that true nations have 0 real interest in conquering or holding on to another country against its will. In fact, he argues that having different independent nations is an absolute necessity. Why? Because they guarantee our liberty. Think about it. If the whole world had only one law and one single master ruling a massive global empire, our individual freedoms would completely vanish. Independent nations balance each other out. They protect our freedom. Wow, okay, we've covered a ton of ground today, right from the beautiful utopian dreams of Soryu all the way down to the deep philosophical ideas of Ernst Renan. You now have exactly the tools you need to completely conquer the first 2 pages of this chapter on your boards. But before I let you go, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought. If Ernst Renan truly believed that nations guarantee our liberty, what exactly happens to that liberty when nationalist pride crosses the line and transforms into a violent desire to conquer others? Hang on to that question, because figuring out that puzzle is exactly what we're going to do as we dive into the rest of this chapter. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in this explainer. Keep crushing those studies, and I'll catch you in the next one.